Hi everyone, this is Eric here from Healing Relationship. This is our weekly recorded session where every week I have a special guest and we talk about healing, self-empowerment and relationship. I believe that the relationship you have with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship you have. Today I'm very glad to have as my guest Simon Berkowitz, and you're from UK. Hi Simon.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, from central London.
I love your accent.
Oh, thank you.
So I met Simon through a mastermind group that we are in, and I really enjoy having several conversations with Simon. So that's why I invited him to be in this conversation today. But let me introduce him. How do I cut my resistance and unleash the creativity I know I'm capable of? This is the question that Simon Berkowitz has been helping his clients explore and solve for the last 20 years. Today, he'll be talking with us about his work and the latest innovative practices for tapping into our true potential. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. I think just one thing. I think when people talk about creativity, so quickly the mind goes to music or art. And for me, the creativity that I'm talking about is actually those moments where we are in flow. And so for me, it's the source of healing. I'm an acupuncturist as well. And when people are in touch with that part of themselves, which is beyond the habitual, this place where that flow comes from, things start to happen. And then relationships, for me, when they come alive, whether it's an intimate one or family or friends or work, it's when we're in touch with that place in ourselves as well. So creativity for me is a bit broader than we're used to thinking about it.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I love that definition of creativity. So how did you come to do that work?
It's actually a thread which has been through everything. In the acupuncture I trained in 20 years ago, the first idea is that we are this spark, and the spark separates from the oneness and goes on a journey to learn about itself. And so that spark I've found in lots of different traditions. In Buddhism, it's the flash of insight that one has. In problem solving, which is the one that we're most familiar with, we see it on a day-to-day basis in the aha moment, the eureka moment when we solve something. It's, we can actually feel a flash there. And then I worked for 7 years as a student with somebody working with dreams. And there are lots and lots of wonderful ways to work with dreams. In this method, you use the dream as a vehicle to get to know oneself, rather like you were saying, the relationship with oneself is the key to everything. We use the dream for that, and also as a way to get in touch with this place of light, clarity, that kind of movement of spontaneity and joy. And so although it's been a thread, the acupuncture, the Chinese medicine, and then this dream work, that's the thing which has really, really coalesced it into what I do today.
So I'm really curious about the dream work. So my first question would be that. So when you work with dream, do you work with the unconscious?
You could say that. You could say that we work with the unconscious. And if you're looking at the way that we think about the mind as this kind of like an ocean, with on the top is the sort of the surface ripples which we experience, and then as you go down, you get to the deeper drivers and the kind of the sort of the more powerful forces within us. Then you could say the dream does give us access to that, because what you have with a dream, every dream, you can always work with it as if it's a metaphor for your life. Always, 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 always. And you can work with it as if it's an actual metaphor, which is coming from the deepest part of you, which you can then relate to. Or you can say, well, look, it's there. I'm going to project onto it. Either way, it doesn't really matter. It gives you that way in. So in that sense, you can say it's a way to the unconscious. But when you're thinking about creativity, if the creativity comes from the depths of us, it's actually the reverse in a way. It's the most conscious part of us. that moment where you get that, that's what it's about.
Mm.
That's, for me, that's the most conscious part of ourselves, shining its light in that moment onto whatever we're looking at. So yes and no. Whatever it is, the dream is this wonderful way that we can get more in touch with ourselves and find out what we really think.
That's really interesting, because most of the time we have, let's say, crazy dreams, silly dreams that that if we try to interpret like literally, it drives us crazy, right? Because it doesn't make any sense. So how do you, in your work, how do you make sense of the nonsense of our dreams?
Well, I have a lot of faith in us, actually, as people, and a lot of faith in, if we leave some space for it, there's an organizing something or other inside of us. So, you know, there are, if you go online or you get a book which has got dream symbols in it, there are lots of different ways. This means that, and that means the other, and then you can put it all together. So that's one way. The way that I actually prefer, and it can be very useful, don't get me wrong, using analysis can be very useful. The way I prefer is to go straight to the creativity and to work with discovery. And what I mean by that is that if you ask this very simple question, what comes to mind, then you open the space for the person to look at the dream and then have something come back to them which may not make sense initially in the terms of the thinking. And if you think about it, when we're struggling with a problem, we don't really want an answer that comes from the same thinking that we've already had. We want something different. And so that question, what comes to mind when you look at the dream, or when you look at that part of the dream, or you look at this dream figure, gives you this direct way in. And it is so direct because, like an aha moment, it can just come. You see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I get it. Yeah.
And so sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, and so your question was about how we make sense of that. And in that moment, you know, when a solution comes, it makes sense, doesn't it? You know, just like, boom, there it is. And so when you ask what comes to mind and you allow space to come, and I'm not saying it happens immediately every time, you may have to ask several times or explore or do something else to get in that space, but it comes with clarity every time. So you know, it's this, and you can move on.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a powerful question, by the way. And so when I hear you talking about creativity, because you were talking about the flow, does it have anything to do with alignment and intuition?
I would think so. Yeah. In my way of thinking about it, definitely. What do you mean by alignment, and what do you mean by intuition?
You know, I mean, intuition is this little voice that we have sometimes that comes from a part of ourselves that tell us what to do. And most of the time we don't listen to that part of ourselves. But when we start to listen, and when we start, you know, to have really some intuition or gut feeling, let's say a gut feeling about something, whether I want to do something and I have a gut feeling that it doesn't feel right for me, or when I do something, it feels so right that I feel it in my body. So that's what I call intuition. That's what I call this little wisdom voice that it's not perceptible, but it's just like a feeling that we have, that we are on track or not on track. That it feels good or it doesn't feel good. That it's right or that it's wrong for us. You know what I mean? And then what I mean by alignment is when we are in tune with ourselves, when we are in tune with that intuition, then we can tap into some wisdom that is unseen within ourselves, and life start to get easier for us, which means we do the things we're supposed to do in a like organic way.
Yeah.
Would you describe it that way?
That really fits very, very closely with how I understand it. I mean, there's a wonderful, I can't remember it exactly at all, but there's a wonderful quote about Steven Spielberg. And he talks, I think he's talking about the intuition or creativity or something along these lines. And he talks about these little whispers.
Yes.
And it's true. We actually have to really be open and paying attention to be able to catch it, because the noises of the habitual thinking, the conditioning, the habits, the reactive patterns that we have you know, the way we've always done things and all this sort of stuff are very loud. And so a lot of the work is actually creating the space in order to be able to hear this little voice, you know, creating the space, creating the time, creating the conditions where it actually has a bit of room to breathe. And then, you know, my personal sense is I don't know that alignment is possible 100% of the time. I sort of my feeling, maybe it's just because I'm a very flawed human, but my sense is certainly for me, and I think I see it around me quite a lot, is that we're actually designed to come in and out of this.
Yes.
As part of our learning process as humans. You know, it's a human quality. And so it's really as a direction and as a skill to develop, alignment is an amazing thing to be working with. And one of the things I loved about what you said was the feeling it in one's body. And I do think that this creative process is wanting in some way to express itself through us. You know, it wants to be in our world, coming through us into the contact that we have with people, into the contact that we have with our work, with our environment. And so alignment really for me is that capacity to be in touch with that, notice when I've fallen out of it as soon as I can, and then go back to creating the conditions that allow me to get back in touch with it again.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. And I have a question because you mentioned space and you mentioned discovery. So what would be a good practice to go to that discovery of ourselves, discovery of the unseen, of the whispers?
Well, I think any way that brings one more into the present moment experience. And I say it that generally because I think there are so many methods out there. You know, breath can be good for one person. Tasting food could be good for another person. I don't think it necessarily matters that much, except that I find the thing that works for me, or another person finds what works for them. Whatever works. And alongside that is something else which I increasingly I see as being fundamental, which is the kindness that is needed for me to be actually compassionate enough towards myself to say, okay, so tasting your food is something which gives you enormous amounts of pleasure. You can bring that into your day to grow that pleasure and to grow that presence through something that makes you feel good. And that takes kind of kindness, rather than, I think it can often be the case that when we feel like we can sometimes feel like we have to grow a skill, develop a skill and really work at it. And of course there's a place for that. But at the same time, that kindness means actually maybe I can find the easiest, most pleasurable way. Why not?
Yeah, I love that you talk about kindness, because usually people talk about compassion but don't really talk about kindness. And it makes me realize that also for the discovery that you talk and the space that you talk, it has to be a space with no judgment, because most of the time we are judgmental about our circumstances, our life, our relationship, whatever we're going through life. We are pretty harsh on ourselves, right? We have been conditioned to do that. So there is so for me, when I hear you talking about creativity, there is a prerequisite, which is stop being judgmental with ourselves and with others to create a better space, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, my personal experience is that I try as I might, I haven't succeeded in getting rid of my judgment, my judgmental part, you know, years and years of working with it. And, you know, even there, I think for me, there's room for kindness towards myself. You know, it's going to happen again. I'm going to catch myself on the tube growling at somebody, you know, not much kindness in that particular growl, I don't think. The tube is the metro for people in different countries. And it's very, very crowded. But, you know, for me, whenever I'm able to be in that non-judgmental space, everything works so much better and the creativity flows. And also, like I just said, having the kindness to realize it's going to happen. I'm going to judge myself. I'm going to have moments of self-criticism. It's just going to happen, you know.
Mm. So you're not waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect condition to still be into that place and to look for discovery.
It's as far as I can tell, it's available at any moment.
Mm.
It's there. I mean, in the tradition that the dream work is a big part of the dream work, which is Kashmir Shaivism, which is a philosophy, I guess you'd call it. They do flip things round so that the universe is conscious and we're less conscious in a way. So it's a bit of a long stretch from the Kashmir Shavings, but it is kind of like that. And so that changes our relationship to this discovery process, because what we're doing is just doing our best to notice what's happening, be kind, create these conditions, and then allow that greater presence to come through.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk about potential, because I mean, we are talking about potential here, but I see a lot of people coming to me, for example, and saying, you know, I want to tap into my true potential. I want to be at my best at my potential. And so I think it's really a concern about everyone. Do we live our life from a place of power, or do we live our life from powerless, right?
Yeah.
But there is one thing that I wonder about potential is, when I'm having this conversation with you right now, Simon, am I in my true potential, or is there something lacking? I do believe that wherever we are in life, it's our best potential. So the way I see it is, as we grow and as we evolve and as we make discovery about ourselves, our potential changes.
Yeah.
Do you relate with that, or do you have any other take on that?
Well, my personal view, I've sort of wrestled with this myself. My personal view is that one way of looking at things is that everything is perfect as it already is. That's kind of that bigger self from the Kashmir Shaivism. That's the universe being conscious. It's perfect. Everything is perfect from that state. But when I look from the other perspective, which is the limited me who is getting older and wished I'd done that and would like to do this, then there's this kind of relativity kind of thing. And so it comes back to this moment, because that's the only place that we can actually do anything. We can't do anything in the future. It's over wherever it is. And we can't do anything in the past. We can only do stuff here. And so the potential, in my understanding, is limitless here. And I'll have differing degrees of being able to recognize that, depending on the day that I've had, whatever processes are going on in me, what kind of lunch I had, did I have too much coffee, whatever it is. And so for me, this question of potential really does come back to, how can I open into the fullest of my being in this moment? Whatever my state. And a creative choice, if I am feeling miserable or struggling with something and not able to see my, those moments that I certainly have, where everything feels very small and very contracted, the creative choice, to fulfill my potential, maybe something as simple as making a cup of tea or calling a friend, or do you see what I mean? It's like, and that feels like a very generous way to myself to be realizing my potential, is to get in touch with the state I'm in and then look to the sorts of actions, behaviors, attitudes that can make the most of that situation.
Mm.
And for me, that seems the simplest way. I feel like for myself, when I can use big projects and am I realizing my true life potential? I can make that into something which is not a kind
Mm.
experience.
Yeah.
Oh, you failed. You haven't done X, Y, Z. It can be like that. So this way of how do I bring more of it now, here? That seems to me to be the most fruitful way into finding and expressing that potential.
Mm. That's great. So what I hear you saying is that at the same time there is this moment of acceptance of what it is,
Yep.
whatever I'm going through right now. But at the same time, being conscious about that, let's do something that will get me out of that. Whether it, like you really well described, whether it's I'm just going to have a cup of tea, or I'm going to call for a friend, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to just lay down for 5 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
So being really conscious about what's happening about the experience, being in touch with our experience, but at the same time, finding ways to get out of the experience that we can have more insights probably.
Yep. Well, and I suppose one of the questions I've had for a while is I don't, sometimes distracting can be a very good thing, or getting away from what's going on can be very good. Sometimes all one can do is just hold on for dear life. There are times which are very tough. I've certainly had some in my life, very, very challenging times. And actually, you know what? I feel that's a creative act. To be actually able to stay as much as I can with myself in a difficult time. That's, for me, that's a creative thing if I'm able to do that. Sometimes I can't do it. Sometimes I have to distract. That's also creative. So it becomes a way of making my experience richer and richer through all the different varieties that it goes through. There's a wonderful example somebody gave me years ago, and he was talking about feelings, and he said, what, so many people go through life and they've got this 8-octave keyboard of their feelings, and all they do is play middle C over and over again. And I rather like that because, I don't want to feel sad particularly, but if sadness is there, there's probably something in it for me. So to allow a bit more movement, and again, this acceptance coming in again, this thing about acceptance and kindness towards oneself, allows that sort of, okay, so I experienced anger, that actually, I see how that was creative. Or frustration, I can see all this relationship which has got stuck. If I can be with that feeling, that very often is the key to unlocking the allowance of something changing.
So being comfortable with the uncomfortable, would you say that?
Yeah. Well, I personally don't know how comfortable I am, but that's definitely something I aspire to.
Yeah, that's great. So let me ask you a question. What is one of the best advice you ever received in your life?
The best advice that I ever received in my life? Well, wasn't really, I mean, it's actually quite recent, this. And it wasn't quite advice, but I've taken it to heart. And it's in relation to working with trauma that it's come up. But I see this kind of application to accessing one's potential, to being in touch with one's creativity. But it's easiest to see looking at trauma. And a lot of trauma approaches, certainly in the past, would look to the recounting of the experience and working it through as a first step. And this piece of advice, although it's not, as I say, quite advice, is don't do that. Look to resourcing yourself and making yourself feel safe.
Mm.
Stabilize yourself first. Find the resources that work for you first before you try and move anything around. And what happens then is that the field, the container, the sort of realm one can operate in gets much, much bigger. And as a result, the challenges, in contrast, start to diminish as these other resources come online. So as you know, like I say, it's not really a piece of advice. And I have to say, even having worked in this field for years, it just did not land like it did in the last year. And I think, looking back, I think the more energy I could have given to that earlier on in my life, the better it would have set me up for well, actually, think about relationships. It would have made that a lot easier. Professionally, all sorts of areas of my life would have been much easier had I understood that earlier. But it's never too late,
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that there is a readiness in our life that sometimes as we grow and as we evolve, we're ready for certain things that we are not for other things. So it's also letting the flow of life getting to us and creating that, as long as we create that space, that container that you're talking about,
yes,
and we keep having insights and things that we learn, and at some point some big pieces, like you say, like the aha moment will come and say, wow, this really, I get it, and I can feel it in my body, and I can feel it, and I see the potential of using that, so that's what I would say. So it's almost, we're already at the end of the interview. Wow. Is there anything, yeah, it was really in the flow, I really appreciated that. Is there anything you want to add to that part of creativity that you talk about, or something that you want to specifically address to people who are listening to that interview?
Only the only thing that comes to mind is that it's natural. It's inbuilt. This whole thing is built into us, and for me, it's more about finding the best ways that allow us to uncover that and express it. And that's really what it's about. So it's not about, although there are skills to be learned, it's not about learning skills. It's just really about creating ways that we can express more of who we really are. And I think that's probably the greatest pleasure of working with people, because as I'm sure you have this yourself, as you work with people, you see more and more and more of them come online, into their lives. I mean, not actually virtually, but into their lives. And it's just a joy. So I think that's really it. It's a natural thing. It's kind of our birthright, really, and we're allowed to explore it.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciated a conversation. If people want to reach out to you, have questions, or they want to work with you, where do we find you?
Okay, so on Facebook, you can go to Samai Method, SAM, S for sugar, AMAII Method, and please do get in touch through there. Or you can go to my website, Simon Berkowitz, SIMON BERKOWITZ.com, and then do get in touch. Very happy to chat.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that interview.
Thank you, Eric.
I really enjoy your energy and your wisdom through what you shared with us today. Thank you very much. So guys, it's time to wrap up. And as I always said before I wrap up, if you open your heart, you have all the love you need. Take care, be at peace, and I'll see you next week.